Morning. Welcome back to Coffee Station. Good to see y'all again. Question has come up. The question we're going to try to answer today is what goods were in the highest demand, what were the most wanted goods in the fur trade? And so we're going to try to answer that today. Most fur trade houses, little over 50% of the goods would be textiles. Textiles, beads, metal goods, metal cookware, and edge tools, butcher knives, belt axes, tomahawks, axes, and weapons. And so we're going to visit with you guys a little bit about some of that today. First, and by the way, the coffee is not any better than the last time you was here. The first thing we're going to visit with you guys about is textiles. It's kind of interesting. Now, you may be asking yourself, why would textiles be a popular item? Well, they were so popular, a little over half of the goods in any trade house anywhere were textiles. Hats, boots, shoes, suspenders, sashes, garters, breeches, vests, coats, caps, hats, dresses, and all sorts of cloth and blankets. And why would textiles make up over half, sometimes a little over 60%, depending on the trade house, of the goods available to trade? Well, a couple reasons. The big one being creature comfort. Down here, it gets really hot in July and August and September, and this cotton shirt is a whole lot more comfortable when it gets 103 in the shade than a leather shirt. And the other half of that is a wool clothing, a wool shirt or wool pair of breeches will hold the body heat in even when it is soaking wet. It'll hold a certain amount of body heat in. And leather is hot in the summer. It is warm in the winter until it gets wet, and then it's going to be wet and cold and clammy until you get to a fire and dry it out. If you use too much heat and not enough smoke, you're going to ruin it. And so, yeah, leather's going to last a lot longer than cotton or linen or wool, but those other three items are a lot more comfortable, and these people like creature comfort as much as anybody else. Now the cloth, just a few I can remember: velveteen, sateen, nankeen, Russian sheeting, Osnaburg, ratteen, bleached, unbleached, and painted muslin, Russian sheeting, gabardine wool, broadcloth, which was mostly wool, and worsted wools. You get a lot of that in different colors. So that's just a few. Checks like this you could get in about a half a dozen colors, 3 or 4 dozen different calico prints, 3-color print, 3 or 4 dozen different 2-color prints. Anything you needed to make clothes except patterns. And so textiles were a huge part of the fur trade. Another item that was probably, I've read that beads were the single most popular trade item through time. Meaning from the time Columbus got off the boat until there was basically the fur trade, the golden era of the fur trade was over, and long after that, they were still, doing some fur trading. Beads were a really popular item. And so we'll show you some of these and tell you a little bit about this stuff. Of course, it won't take long, no more than we know about beads. Why were beads so popular and in demand? Now, they were very expensive luxury items. The reason they were so popular now, you've heard, some of the tribes would use porcupine quills and dye them and use them to decorate and adorn garments. Well, you are limited to areas where there are porcupines, or you are limited to areas where you can trade with people who have access to porcupine quills. Even then, your colors are very limited because you're using berries and this and that and the other, needles off of trees and roots and certain things to dye to get these colors. So your colors are limited. Porcupine quills, and then almost all the tribes had access to bird feathers, teeth, bones, claws, furs, feathers, rocks and nuts, and if that is what you have access to decorate and adorn yourself and your clothing with, then your colors are very, very limited. And so Columbus shows up, and one of his accounts, he has two accounts and they differ, but one of his accounts says that the first person he ran into when he got off the boat on the first trip, he handed the guy a handful of cut glass beads. And so all of a sudden you have the colors of the rainbow. You've got lots and lots and lots of different colors. And so that accounted for some of the popularity of beadwork. Now this is Cheyenne style, not necessarily Cheyenne made. And the Cheyennes liked everything very, geometric, symmetrical is the word I'm looking for. They wanted everything balanced. And, different, if you are a bead person and you know what you're looking for, a lot of times you can tell what area of the country that a tribe came from due to the pattern and the colors of beads used. Now, one of the things that they had then that they still have were bead cards, and then they ran vertically instead of horizontally. Now, these have some colors that some of the transparent colors, they didn't have those then. The little number 8s were about as small as you saw that the tribes here wanted to trade for. They weren't interested in much smaller than 8s. Those sizes didn't get popular in this part of the world until the 1890s. But when Coffee and Coville go to New Orleans or St. Louis to buy a stock of goods, the little ones, the 8s and smaller, which looks like you didn't see many 8s then, or smaller than 8, the little ones would already be strung up on a clump called a hank of beads. The sizes above that, from 8s, or rather above an 8, those were, you had to string those up after you got them out here. And the reason you would string them up and hang them up like this, so they look like a necklace, is so your customers could see what goods you had. And you heard me mention beads are a very expensive luxury item. In the Red River Valley, so to speak, on the Southern Plains, circa 1840, one strand of beads cost a buffalo robe, or 2 beaver, or 2 otter, or 4 fox, blah, blah, blah. And this was a hank. This strand is a hank. This strand is a hank. But the little ones, this whole clump is a hank of beads. And so beads are a very expensive luxury item. These people had clothes that they kept back for special ceremonies and special occasions, just like, we got Sunday go to meeting clothes. They had clothes that they held back for special occasions. And the more beadwork on a girl's and a woman's moccasins and leggings and dress, The more beadwork on those items, the better reflection that was on whoever the provider was, be that daddy, older brother, grandpa, uncle, whoever it was, the husband. That was a better reflection on them because beads were so terribly expensive. Now, another item that was very in demand were edged tools and tinware. The Plains tribes generally liked the way cast iron cooked. They weren't crazy about the weight. From what they can determine in this part of the world, most of the cookware that the tribes traded for was the tinware. You could get pint and half pint and I think quart tin cups, shaving mugs. You could get these little buckets like this with a bail and a lid, both from this size up to 4-gallon size. You could get buckets like we're familiar with, brass kettles, I think up to, I believe it was 5 or 6 gallon. Plates, let's see, bowls, basins, teapots, coffee kettles, all sorts of tinware. And part of the reason for that was if you are taking a bladder or a stomach and heating rocks and throwing the heated rocks in the water to boil your food, how long is that going to take? And that bladder is not going to last for, too very long. And tinware, you can set it right on the fire and it'll last a long time. And so, again, metal goods made life easier. Tomahawks, axes, half axes, built axes, hatchets, you could get all that. Usually at a place like this, they would come without the handle in them. You could trade for the handles here, but they usually would ship them. I think it's mostly due to shipping. You could ship it easier. If you could ship a bundle of handles easier than you could the whole thing, and you could ship a bunch of heads. It'd take up less space than trying to ship the whole thing. But again, very popular item. One of the things that you could get around some of these places, depending on who your main customer base was, at a place like this, you could get a metal bladed hoe, garden hoe, because the Wichitas and the Caddos farmed about half the year, and so there was a market for a metal bladed garden hoe. One last thing about metal bladed garden hose I was jabbering so much about. If you're using the shoulder blade of a buffalo, that metal hose is going to last a whole lot longer, and that is another reason that butcher knives were so popular. If you are using a flint knife, it's initially going to be much sharper than a metal bladed butcher knife, but when it comes time to sharpen it, you have to wait. If you're the one using it, you have to wait for a whole other knife to be napped out and handled. Literally put a handle on it of some kind. Where with this, you take a file or a wet rock and you take a few strokes on it and it's good to go again. So butcher knives and all sorts of edged tools were really popular among the tribes. Circa 1840, 1 or 2 buffalo robes, 2 to 4 beaver, blah blah blah. This is one style of several that were available. There were some small outfits that made knives, small blacksmiths, but a lot of the best cutlery came from, nearly all the best cutlery came from England up until the late 30s, and a guy went to England and got some English knife makers to come to the States and begin making knives, and so we took over a big share of the knife market in the North American fur trade. But butcher knives were very popular. And again, I should say that tomahawks and belt axes and butcher knives were usually camp tools. They were not used as weapons. They were tools used around the camp. Now, last thing, and we're not going to go into great detail, but we'll mention it this morning, is weapons. Rifles, pistols, shotguns, trade guns, which was a smooth bore without a rear sight on them, flint or percussion. That is a whole nother segment, and we'll get into that the next time. Right now, I'm going to go out here. Silas's favorite saddle mule has a canker sore on its hind end. And so we're going to go mix up some grease and sulfur and try to put it on there and cure the mule's hind end. But appreciate y'all coming along. Anytime you're down the trail anywhere close to Coffee Station, y'all just drop in and have a cup, and we'll visit with you. And next time you come by, we'll let you take a look at Silas's mule's hind end. Morning.